Hello, everyone, and welcome back to What the Trans US Edition. My name is Val, and I am one of three wonderful hosts bringing you today's episode. I am joined by...
Hey there, I'm Quetza. I'm also on this podcast. Sorry, I've barely gotten any sleep, but it's wonderful to be here.
Hello, everyone. It's Lizzie. This is going to be my last episode for a little bit. I've got some stuff going on in real life, so enjoy me while you have me today.
As must me all. I don't know what I just said, but it wasn't correct. So,
No!
it's the scariest thing you'll hear in today's podcast, I hope, in today's special Halloween episode. Ooh. And I have some spooky Halloween facts for the both of you. Did you know the United States has two types of termites? And that's where I was for the past month and a half. Thankfully, they were drywood, which means we had to tent the house, and it was very expensive. But I am back, and it was a very rare burst of my life being much more interesting than it usually is, so hopefully it'll be a one-off.
Termites are very interesting, so.
They are odd little critters.
Speaking of Halloween, being that it is Halloween, a little bit of a PSA as someone who has done some scare acting in haunted houses. Please don't go to haunted houses if you know that your fight or flight response is to throw fists. Because it has actually been... Because I'm not acting in haunted houses this year, but I have a lot of friends who are. And it has been worse this year than any year previously of people going to haunted houses and fighting or touching, putting hands on the scare actors. That is going to get you kicked out of the haunted house. That's going to get you banned from the haunted house. Please don't go to a haunted house if you know that's going to be your response. There are security usually on site, and there's usually police officers on site. As much as we may not all like the police right now, they are there, and they are going to... You're going to catch charges, basically, more than likely.
I wonder what's caused the uptick. That's...
I assume it's probably the generally higher anxiety in society, plus, the utter capricious commodification of our experience.
Well, it's also, there's a lot of higher anxiety, especially with politics and it being election season, which, speaking of election season...
Hey, that's a better transition than I had planned.
I love that. So speaking of presidential candidate Kamala Harris, she kind of backstepped a little bit waffling on trans issues. That's our first topic for today.
So specifically, this was Harris being interviewed by NBC News' Haley Jackson on October 22nd, pretty recent. It was a pretty open interview. They touched on many topics. Specifically, Jackson touched on things throughout the race, including Harris's thoughts on potential sexism and how that might have affected her chances, various things from the Republican Party along those lines, their approach to the availability of abortion, just anything you would expect from a pre-election interview. Halfway through, Jackson asked, very broadly speaking here, do you believe that transgender Americans should have access to gender-affirming care in this country? Point blank. Nothing to waffle about there. Harris then immediately pivoted away and tried to frame it in the idea of we should follow the law, which, fuck off, and talk about things like the Affordable Care Act. She pivoted into making sure that elder people have insulin, not even vaguely related. Her quote specifically, I believe that people, as the law states, even on this issue about federal law, that is a decision that doctors will make in terms of what is medically necessary. I'm not going to put myself in a position of a doctor, but let's also understand that Donald Trump is running tens of millions of dollars in ads to talk about two cases to distract from the fact that his policy and plans to take away from the Affordable Care Act, which provides health care for tens of millions of people in our country. And she went on about healthcare, the attempted dismantling of the Department of Education, insulin prices again, just anything but talk about trans people. And then in a shock beyond shock, Jackson actually pressed her, which I'm so unused to in interviews.
Props on Jackson for that.
Props to Jackson for that, because I'm so used to people just going we'll just follow this train of thought. No, Jackson went, I will move on, but I don't know that I heard a clear answer from you on the issue of gender-affirming care. It sounds like what you're saying is there should be something between trans Americans and their doctors, which feels a long way from we see you and we love you, which was your message to trans Americans in May. What do you want the LGBTQ plus community to know as they're looking for a full-throated backing from you for trans Americans? And from that, Harris responded, I believe that all people should be treated with dignity and respect, period, and should not be vilified for who they are, and should not be bullied for who they are. And that is a true statement for me my entire career, and that has not changed. Which is something. It's also a worthless platitude.
Right. And there's also like two things I want to add like really quickly. The first one is it's just very strange, like just like logic when you think about it. When the question is should trans people have rights, and her answer is that's a decision between them and their doctors, which sounds like she's saying only doctors can talk about the rights of trans people, which is weird, which is just like a weird logical coincidence. But the other one is, I think one of the direct quotes from the interview is, I think people should follow the law, but the law's like, literally killing us. So it sounds like she's de facto saying they should kill themselves,
Yeah, it's not a good framing.
No!
She seemed to be really put on the spot by a pretty straightforward question about a thing she has expressed before.
Do you think people should have rights? Ah, shit, this is a hard
I think you should just follow the law, man, or I have to put you in a men's prison.
Well, honestly, I feel like this is unfortunately pretty par for course from a political candidate, especially presidential political candidate. Something that I've noticed over the years is around, when we get to like this like crunch time right before election day, is that presidential candidates in particular, they tend to waffle. They tend to be very picky and choosy about their words, kind of dance around with the topic and the actual answer when they get close to election time. I think it's kind of like a marketing strategy type deal. Unfortunately, I've seen it time and time again with presidential elections. I think this is pretty par for course. While hey, come on, Kamala, you have in the past spoken out in support of us, of our community. We need you to keep that energy, keep that up through the entire thing. Not start to step back and waffle on it now that it's like crunch time and we have like a week before election day. I get that she probably is like trying to say like, yeah, support them without actually saying it. We need you to actually say it. We need you to say it every single time, especially this close to the election day. But perhaps on Jackson for being like, hey, I didn't get a clear yes or no answer on this, because that's exactly what we're wanting right now is yes or no answers to a yes or no question, not
right.
Yeah.
Here's shiny. Ooh, I'm trying to talk about these things. That's exactly what that feels like.
Let me pivot to talking about the Department of Education for some reason.
Yeah.
Right. It ultimately comes off as though in the grand calculus of running one of the largest and most expensive presidential campaigns in U.S. history, that trans people just aren't a valuable asset, essentially, from her team's point of view. It's not great to be looked at from the lens of an asset rather than a human. I think ultimately she's just alienated people who could be on her side. I certainly don't wish for Donald Trump to win. Obviously, he's a fascist.
What? This is the first time hearing of this.
Yeah, he is a fascist, and on top of that, annoying. The fascist is the more important. The fascist is a far more important.
Annoying.
The fascist is the far more horrifying part, of course.
Unfortunately, trying to get a straight answer from a presidential candidate is a bit like herding cats. But props on Jackson for trying, because that's hard.
She did try. It is unfortunately also an issue you can't abstract. Like, if you talk about national security or immigration or whatever, you can be a little more floaty and vague. Just be like, we're going to keep our country safe. We're going to make sure nobody bad gets in there. But if you start to talk about trans people, there's only so many ways you can really, like... What she said there about saying people shouldn't be bullied for who they are is about as far as you can abstract it. Beyond that, you have to start making concrete statements about your beliefs. And that's very scary before November 5th.
When you just say follow the law, here's the thing is laws change. Laws get challenged and laws can change. We've seen it time and time again.
Laws aren't always just.
Exactly. We've had a history of unjust laws. So just saying follow the law, we need to make sure that the law we're trying to follow is just and should even be a law in the first place.
Laws reflect the politics of society. Not necessarily its morality, but its politics. Which means by saying follow the law, she is just saying follow the political climate. And the political climate is genocidal, which is horrifying.
Well, unfortunately, there are reasons why they would not put much stock into providing promises for trans healthcare, as we will be talking about in our little section overviewing what the voters of the United States currently hold in high regard.
Yep.
So Republicans, their campaigns are overspending on wedge issues. And one of those wedge issues is the trans community. So political spending for these wedge issues has this election season been both wild and horribly misplaced, which might actually be a good thing for once, sort of, ignoring the potential harm to our community. Reportedly, Republicans have spent $120 million on attack ads with a focus on anti-trans messaging, according to ad impact data. And much of that spending has occurred in just the last 5 weeks. Unsurprisingly, this is not a popular move. Polling from the Data for Progress shows that most voters, around 80%, including 85% of Republican voters, want candidates to spend less time talking about transgender issues because, they would rather us not be seen and perceived. They don't like to see us at all. Earlier polls from the same source showed most voters care for much larger issues when voting. 17% listed jobs and the economy as their primary concern, 12% listed immigration, 11% listed inflation, and 10% listed threats to democracy, with only 1% listing LGBTQ plus issues as their primary voting influence. LGBTQ plus issues also polled at 1% for secondary voting influence. In the past 5 weeks alone, Trump and his super PACs have spent $29 million running ads criticizing Harris for performing, quote-unquote, transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison, as the memes have popularized. And according to Gallup polls, issues like the economy, democracy, and national security rate are much more important issues among registered U.S. voters, while transgender issues are ranked dead last.
Not including like gay issues, like specifically transgender issues, the dead last position.
To put this in retrospect, there are about 2 million trans people in the U.S. That's like spending $60 per trans person. That's enough for me to, ironically enough, buy my HRT.
It is a wild amount of spending for such a small issue. Like, we really are the wedge issue because we are, to voters, the least important thing in the world, and yet so the spending being thrown at like attacking such a small segment of the population, it is hog wild.
Yeah, if they want to throw that money away, they can just put it in our pockets instead.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I'll throw that money away gladly.
If you guys want to waste it, I could help you.
I'm pretty sure I could buy, food, K-pop album, video game, something.
I was going to build like a giant gold statue in my yard, but I guess that works too.
I can be gay and definitely not commit crimes.
Ooh, I would never do that. I'm going to follow the law, President Harris, I promise. Please ignore the last 10 minutes of this podcast. Oh, Christ.
It's an issue that not only is dead last on the minds of Republicans, but it ultimately goes to show that the motivating politics of the Republican Party is, overall, it is fascism. Their goal is to be as extreme as possible because they're telegraphing their moves, even if they're not popular. It doesn't matter to them whether or not they're popular. In all honesty, it's never mattered to Republicans whether or not they're popular. Their entire political platform relies on the idea of the silent majority, right?
Yeah.
Which they rely on the idea that we're shadow popular. If we get into power, everyone will really see what we're about. But the evidence just doesn't back that. And frankly, fascists throughout history tend to get elected into office when they gain power, and tend to use what seem to be small wedge issues and turn it into the entire political program. We're the scapegoat.
Yeah, we are the rage bait and the clickbait.
Yeah, and it shows in how little that people actually give. Even Republicans who oftentimes fucking hate our guts are like, could we talk about the economy or something?
Hey, related to that, from the same article, nearly 3 in 4 voters, regardless of political affiliation, including 58% of Republicans, agreed that transgender people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. So even in their own party, it's not a popular position.
The call's coming from in the house. The call's coming from
oh my God, we gotta get out. If only that silent majority would say something.
Right. Vote.
Please, for the love of God, vote.
It says something that the party whose base tends to be on the wrong side of history is like still has enough basic like consciousness to them and conscientiousness to say, well, this feels look, I hate them because they're poor and or they're a different color than me, but I don't really care that they're trans.
I don't care if they're wearing a dress. I hate them regardless of that. So, yeah, even though we are upset with Harris for being, frankly, spineless, refusing to offer anything beyond a platitude, still the better choice, tragically, and you should absolutely vote for her accordingly. However, God, wouldn't it be nice if there was any other option?
Yeah.
It
feels like these days, we keep being told about the lesser evil, but like I think the road to hell is kind of paved with that.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I certainly hope that as the days continue, something changes so that we don't have to put up with any % speed run straight to oblivion.
Unfortunately, we're stuck in a two-party system, which we were warned against by George Washington himself.
Weird. How
It's weird
strange that he warned.
if it's weird that like the arch racist was like, "Hey guys, this is a bit much."
Hey guys, this is kind of messed up.
Like, come on, guys. But like, we're kind of stuck in this two-party system, and the thing is, if we're gonna get out of that, we need a third-party candidate to start campaigning for the next election now and pushing hard and getting their name out there for the next 4 years.
We need way more than that,
I mean,
tragically.
yes, we need more than that, but to start, we need that instead of like the 1 year like before election day, because we've done that year and year, election year after election year, and it's not gotten us anywhere. We need to have more eyes on the smaller parties sooner so that we can actually start looking at these options and giving them momentum before the election, like crunch time, or when people start campaigning starts.
So here's what I think. Actually, I think if we're talking about strategy, there, I don't actually think the president is much worth it at all. I think if you want a third party to be viable, you don't focus on the president. That's spending a lot of money to lose.
Well, I'm not saying just presidents. I'm talking state level politicians, our Congress, just our senators, all of that.
I think rather than having electeds be our, rather than relying on people who once they get into office have no reason to give a fuck about us, we building up tenants unions and worker unions, building up popular assemblies that can mobilize a society such that regardless of who's in office, we can simply force them to do what we want by depriving the economy of the one thing it needs to exist, which
That's
is
one
us.
thing I can get behind is more unions. Like, come on, unions are proven to work. Some of the basic rights we have as employees in workplaces are because of unions, which people don't want to give them credit for that, because there's this whole like push of unions are bad. No, unions are actually really, really great, guys. Unions are great.
Yeah, can we get a W chat for unionism?
Frankly, just more citizen action in general.
Right.
Because it is so much easier to just be like, well, it's not that bad for me yet, and let the status quo exist as it does, which is largely what we do. And then occasionally something like transgender issues comes up, and it becomes a thing that people argue about a little bit, and then maybe you seed like just a hint so that people can go, oh, we made progress, and then we can go back to sleep for 10 years.
Yeah,
so, totally fine.
But that's kind of like the politics of an empire, right?
Yeah.
Like people
So much momentum behind us.
aren't looking for a reason to be for society to become better. They're looking for a reason to go back to sleep and watch whatever the next thing is. But there's something to be said about the fact that like trans people are some of the most likely people to engage in social activism. Right, it's trans people, Black people, Latinos, or the Asians, Native Americans are the most likely to engage social activism because, frankly, we're on the margins.
Yeah, most marginalized communities.
When things get bad, they get bad for us first, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think if there's anything that the Republicans overspending on wedge issues and Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party really in general, not really giving us much lip service at all, and even in the best of times shows us, is that the only way that this community as we exist is going to be able to resist this horrific turning of the tide is to simply have the social capacity to throw a wrench into the entire system. That will get us our rights. Historically, it's always been what gets us rights.
Are you telling me I can't just vote and then go back to sleep?
No, unfortunately, we have to like do shit about life.
I don't want to do stuff that's hard.
Oh God, tell me about it.
I got work in the morning. I don't have work in the morning.
You know what else is hard? Dealing with legislative stuff.
All right.
You sound like you're about to like swerve into an ad for a Casper mattress. But sleeping doesn't have to be if your new Casper mattress. No, I'm sorry. I appreciate the transitions. It's just very funny to like hard cut and be like, all right, we're talking.
As a trans person, I can appreciate a good transition.
And that's why I'm transitioning into a Casper mattress. Yeah. And then it just cuts to me laying face down, motionless for 5 minutes.
So Tennessee laws, right? Wouldn't that be crazy?
Oh, it would be crazy if I continued to talk about Tennessee laws, because we have a legislative update.
Whoa.
Are we still doing the theme? I don't know if we still have... I made music for this. I didn't make music. I found music for this ages ago, and I don't know if we even still do the bit. So, back in April of 2023, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU of Tennessee, Lambda Legal, and the Akin Gump Strauss Hauer and Feld LLP sued the state of Tennessee to block the state's ban on medically necessary gender-affirming care for Tennessee's transgender youth on behalf of 3 transgender adolescents, their families, and a medical provider. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case, and oral arguments are scheduled to take place on December 4th, 2024. As with similar lawsuits, the suit argues that Tennessee's ban violates the equal protection rights for transgender adolescents in the state. The United States later intervened, also arguing that Tennessee law violates the Equal Protection Clause, which one would think is pretty obvious, but, have to have it spelled out for states sometimes.
I have a few thoughts. Right. I have 2, really.
Have as many thoughts as you'd like.
Of course.
So you're only allowed 1 and a penny.
And only if they follow the law, because we follow the law on this podcast.
I'll have you know I'll have as many thoughts as I want. Anyhow. The first one is, I hope the Tennessee law gets shit on in the Supreme Court. Do I think that'll happen? Well, it's a 6-3 conservative majority. It's a Supreme Court, which is, as of late, has meant supremely ass. The most unaccountable assholes in the entire government. Ugh. And we got the boofing guy on there, so I don't know I don't know how excited I am, but I do hope that the Supreme Court sees reason. The other thing that worries me is that it's been on Republicans' radar for a while now to create an issue that would force a re-examination of the equal protection, and so I worry that this is their vehicle for that. I worry.
Yeah, it is rough because you do have to make that choice between, do I let this clearly unjust law stand until the Supreme Court is more sympathetic, which could take decades at this point, which is so depressing, or do I push it now and hope that, it's not completely hopeless. They have made okay-ish rulings on some things, but it's just a question of, are they waiting for a softball like this? Where they can be like, no, trans people aren't protected. Ha ha ha.
Exactly. Oh, you want it to be about gender? Well, the law says nothing about gender, just sex.
Oh, I'm sorry, just biological sex.
So you're biologically rightless. It's part of the endless tension that exists of being a trans person in the U.S. Dude, what battles do we fight, and what happens if we do, and what happens if we don't?
It does suck to be in that position where you have to be like, can I win this fight in a way that won't hurt us for a decade? Instead of just, can I please have an ounce of rights?
Right.
Please, sir, may I have some more?
Sir, can I have some more?
Can I have some more?
It's especially frustrating when, like, trans youth, to put a segue, because these two topics are related, especially when, like, trans youth want care. In fact...
Why, Quetza, would you please tell me more about how trans children want more rights?
Yeah, and how they don't regret care. Fucking shocker. So in a study that has finally stated the obvious, the JAMA Network study of trans youth, which was just released recently, NPR reported on it a few weeks ago at this point, reported that out of 220 polled trans youth, only 4% expressed any degree of regret, and 50% expressed total satisfaction. With the rest of them, some 46% of study participants expressing some degree of ranging satisfaction with their outcomes. To break down how the study is performed, out of 220 youth sampled who also completed the survey, 155 were white, 30 were multiracial, 18 were Hispanic, 17 were quote-unquote other race or ethnicity, including quote-unquote Asian, Black, and Native American. There is something to be said about needing more racially diverse studies. The expression of racialized patriarchy means that for a lot of for example Latinos and Latinas like myself, who we tend to experience a very and almost a frustrating caricature of patriarchy. Which patriarchy is already bad in and of itself, but under the lens of racialized patriarchy, it can be even harder to socially come out. And so there's something to be said about that, and that probably also affects the number of people who can be interviewed. And it's hard to participate in a study and when you can't even be out to your parents. So I fully understand it, but I would like to see some more. But that said, it doesn't take away from the validity of this whatsoever. The gender identities of those sampled at the point of last interaction were 132 girls, 68 boys, and 28 quote unquote gender diverse. So non-binary, gender fluid, gender queer, etc. Of whom a full 211 showed no regrets at all. Like, out of 220, 211 were like, we love this, actually. We like being trans. And to talk about those 4%, as many probably will, of them, half of them continued care. So out of 9, 4 continued care. And of the 5 who didn't. And of these 9, a lot of their complaints, we're talking about the nature and context of the care, not the care itself. When asked, according to NPR, talked about things such as regretting how an implant got inflamed or the social setting with which they transitioned in, showing that when regret generally exists, it's very rarely regretting being trans. It's regretting either being in a society that hates trans people or regretting the exact specific context and the method of care distribution. Which is very different from regretting being trans. To quote the study, it showed that that regrets were not synonymous with stopping care, which means even those who had some misgivings about how their transition is going still wanted to transition.
Yeah, but that's my biggest takeaway from this is that while there are some people who had some regrets related to their transition, it wasn't they regretted transitioning. They regretted, probably the method that they went for in transitioning, or, some of the care they may have gone through, or their own circumstances surrounding their care in transition. They don't regret being trans. So, that's the takeaway for me on that. People are going to take that as being, oh yeah, no, but there are people who regretted transitioning and being trans. No, actually, they didn't. They just had regrets about some of the things for their process in transitioning, not actually being trans. Like, they probably wish they'd done this versus that. And you know what? That's par for course with medical care. As someone who is chronically ill and has had a lot of, medical stuff, medicines and everything, yeah, that's pretty par for course, actually.
To put it bluntly, more people regret knee surgery than regret transition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Like, regret rates for tattoos are higher than, like, gender-affirming care generally. And that's pretty common in these studies.
More people fucking regret their cereal than regret being trans, right?
Like, let's be really honest. Like, I've had some medicines that I have been put on in the past, and medicines that I've, tried and everything, trying to figure out what works best for me in my chronic illnesses and what's going to, help mitigate symptoms and everything. And there's some medications that I wish I had never been put on because they made things worse for me. And that's just because of how my body handled and reacted to it. And I wish I could go back and be like, no, I'm not going to take this medicine because it's going to make things worse. But, that's hindsight. You know what the saying is, hindsight is 20/20.
Specifically for trans medication, just because, hey, something that I've had experience with. For example, if you are trans feminine in the United States, there's a pretty high chance that if you don't get injectable estrogen, you'll be put on spironolactone as your testosterone blocker. And the most common side effect is that it's going to make you pee a lot. And it's not uncommon that you will wake up several times at night, especially in the first couple months of taking it. And being trans, potentially in a household where people aren't super cool about it, not sleeping well, being stressed about all these things all at once, yeah, I can see being pretty upset about that and reporting hey, this medicine sucks. Personally, I wish there was other options too. I've been there. And there are, especially in the UK.
Other options. And even here, in fact, I'm not even on Spiro. Spiro is one of the worst. Is one of the worst ones for testosterone blockers.
It's wild. It's not fun.
No, not at all. If you're deciding to transition, look up things other than Spiro.
Please ask. Although some places can't give you, if you go to Planned Parenthood specifically, they can only prescribe specific medications. Yeah. Just something to keep in mind. If you go to Planned Parenthood, they're going to be here's Spiro, here's your 2 milligrams of estrogen. Yeah. Right. Maybe they'll get you on progesterone after 6 months. I can't remember exactly what my timetable was. It's all very specific. So you might have to go to a specialized doctor for that if you want something that isn't Spiro.
Yeah, and sometimes, unfortunately, insurances will be like, haha, nope, we're
and also that.
This.
Right, exactly. To reframe this, if a new medicine were to come out that had only a 4% rate of regret, that would be a medical miracle.
That'd be amazing.
Mm-hmm. If some new treatment came out and only had 4% regret, and most of that regret was just how it was administered, not the fact that it was administered, that would be mind-blowing. That's a penicillin level of success.
In any other context for medical care, this would be considered a smashing hit.
Good, we did a medicine. Congratulations, right?
This is a huge success. This would be touted all over the world, but because it's trans people, trans community, they regretted it.
Only 96% had those no problems. What about that last 4%? Maybe none of them should have it.
Maybe no one should have it.
Maybe we should jail the people who do. And you're
maybe we should throw rocks at you.
This is
what?
The plot has been lost, right?
Yeah.
We have a methodology of care that has the same rate of success as when penicillin fucking first came out, and it's treated like it's an abomination because, frankly, we're a tool by the Republican Party to gain power.
And I'm totally not setting Quetza up to talk more, but so for this study specifically, I think if I read correctly, I didn't write it in the document because I'm a fool. I believe they looked for participants between 2013 and 2017, and then they finally wrapped it up in 2024. So it was over a specific period of time. And in regards to the racial identity of those that were polled, I wonder if it would be any different if you started polling them now. Have attitudes changed in any of these communities where you might find more applicants who aren't white, or would you just find the same spread?
See, and that's definitely something I would love to know on a scientific and sociological level. I think it's really important that we get that kind of information. It's frustrating that both in our political climate and in our research, it's very difficult to get multiracial views of things, which are often a feedback loop of each other.
I mean, we had that issue with the podcast in we had 2 white trans femmes, and then most of the applicants, well, I wouldn't say most of the applicants, but normally when people apply to talk on a podcast like this, it's white trans femmes. I think Quetza might have been the only person who wasn't white who was yeah, I'd like to do that.
Yeah.
It's not even a question of having applicants to choose from. Just no one wants to step up and talk about it, or they aren't aware that it's an opportunity that they have, which sucks.
Or if they are aware, because of society is racist. What do you know? they immediately discount themselves.
Which also sucks, because as we've talked about in the past, like, people who are black and trans at the same time experience violence at much higher rates than white people. And the views that they have from that would be very different than what I view when I look at, like, you know, the safety of potentially taking part in a survey like this or anything like.
Right. And those voices are invaluable. Those who experience some of the greatest repression deserve, and very much as a community, we need to be uplifting those voices, because otherwise it becomes white people talking about things in the context of white people. And while trans people get treated worse, while white trans people get treated worse than other white people, it's not necessarily comparable. There's an intersectionality that gets missed.
Now, despite all of this not fun stuff, we do have little glimmers of hope. As I've talked about before, we like to end on something approaching trans joy. In this case, maybe not as happy as some things, but I'm going to count it.
So our bit of trans joy is that Minnesota doctors continue providing healthcare in an island of trans protection despite the political climate. So a little bit of context here. Gender affirming care for youth is banned in Iowa, North Dakota, and South Dakota, as well as 20 other states as a result of an anti-trans legislation push in state governments since 2022. Minnesota, on the other hand, signed a bill designating the state as a trans refuge. A clinic known as Family Tree Clinic in Minneapolis was interviewed by NPR in the context of a massive influx of trans people seeking care due to the repression from surrounding states. During the interview, they stated, "You have two choices. You can get scared. You can say we're going to do it, we're going to do it more, and we're going to teach everyone else how to do it too." Family Tree now runs the Midwest Trans Health Education Network, which have trained roughly 50 healthcare providers, including those in rural areas, and operates via a sliding scale to expand healthcare access to the poor end of our trans community. In 2023, they saw over 200 people from out of state, and other clinics such as Children's Minnesota have seen an increase of 30% in calls to its gender health program. Dr. Cade Gepford, pronouns they, them, who runs the gender health program at Children's Minnesota, has advocated on behalf of trans youth in the state house and overseen the expansion of care at Children's Minnesota. Quote, "Sometimes it takes someone who's a pediatrician to get up on the stand and correct disinformation," end quote. Quote, "Most of what affects a child's well-being happens at the doctor's office," end quote.
That is pretty nice.
Yeah.
The education part is especially something that I'm interested in. Having sought treatment, I was originally from Missouri, and that's where I saw my treatment. Other than going to Planned Parenthood, I occasionally spoke with doctors in my area at the time. And I would say conservatively 0% had any idea what to do with trans healthcare, and not even in a malicious way. My primary care provider, when I went in, I voluntarily listed myself as trans on my intake forms and stuff, and he was curious about it because he didn't have any other patients who were out and trans in my very small hometown, which is not surprising. And the thing he found most amusing is that, full transparency here, I have suffered some hair loss because testosterone will do that to you. That's just what happens. And on estrogen, started to reverse some of that because that's a natural byproduct of blocking testosterone. Sometimes you'll reverse some of the hair loss. Not all.
Right.
Yeah, if you have a widow's peak, you can look at getting on finasteride, but that's not between me and you. That's between you and whatever doctor you Google up. And he was like looking through my hairline and stuff and was like, I had no idea it could do that, despite being a care provider who might have provided estrogen to, you know, women going through menopause or something, just having no idea that you can stop testosterone-based hair loss. Coincidentally, he had suffered a lot of testosterone-based hair loss. And we joked back and forth, and I was like, I mean, you could do it, but I don't know. It seems a little extreme if you want to jump on that train. And he was very amused by that. I don't think he bit, though. So I did not trans my doctor. But yeah, having a route for care providers who don't traditionally help others with gender-affirming care, I think is an excellent move. And I hope that expands to other states, especially when they're stuck in the middle of a bunch of other states who are kind of have their thumbs up their asses about trans issues, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, good job, Minnesota, and good job, Dr. Kepford.
Definitely, yeah.
As for that quote at the end, I think it actually says happens outside the doctor's office. I just wanted to make sure that was...
Oh, outside the doctor. Yeah. I think the word got cut off a little bit there.
It happens. I figured that's what happened on the mic, you know?
Yes.
But yeah, no, seriously, it's a good job. Especially in rural areas, which can be trans care deserts. It can be care deserts in general, frankly. But especially for trans people, can be care deserts. Educating healthcare providers in rural areas is a veritable godsend to the trans community, and a good job on them.
It was definitely rough, Missouri-wise. Like, my nearest clinic for Planned Parenthood was, I think, like 2.5, 3 hours away. Like, I'd have to go to Kansas City, but, you know, thankfully due to telehealth stuff during the pandemic, at least that was made slightly more available. Yeah. I don't know if that continued with Planned Parenthood. I hope it did, because it really opened some doors.
Fingers crossed.
There was another part that actually I didn't write down, but I just remembered that was written in that same article. That pointed out that Family Tree and Children's Minnesota have both seen a lot of their patients come in moving from local states in order to be closer to care, because distant care means less checkups, and no matter what you do, telehealth is usually worse quality health than in person.
Yeah.
That means that the 30% increase in calls and the 200 people from out of state is actually potentially a lower number than the real number of people who are coming from out of state, because people may have moved to then start care.
Yeah, which we've seen in other cases, like with people moving out of Texas in order to get care for either gender affirming care or abortion access, things like that. We've seen that with other cases as well in other states. It's honestly a trackable thing.
It's literally me. I literally left Missouri because Missouri was starting to go a little draconian in, 2022, 2023.
Yeah. So, with all that said, thanks, Minnesota, for not being evil. And
Thanks, Minnesota.
Thank you, Dr. Gepford, for fucking holding the line.
Oh, God, yeah, no kidding. Well, I think we've touched on most of what has happened in the past couple weeks. Hopefully not as scary as whatever you all have planned for Halloween. Fingers crossed. Personally, I'm going to play Silent Hill 2's remake. I hope.
Oh, yeah.
I'm starting a new job.
Hey, that is terrifying.
That is absolutely terrifying.
Ooh, happy Halloween!
You beat me to it, for real. I might dye my hair, and I live in a conservative area, so that might be scary to them.
They're going to point at you and say slurs.
So it's a Seto Kaiba getting blasted.
Today's script was written by myself, Quetza, and Lizzie, and whatever the dog's name is.
Finnegan!
Finnegan. Thank you, Finnegan, for your contributions. It was presented by the same. Again, thank you, Finnegan. Our theme music, as always, was composed by Wartsara Yui Karlberg, and we are now going to run through our list of wonderful Patreon producers to whom we are infinitely grateful, for they keep our podcasting afloat. Starting with Tin Roof,
Naestrom,
Danny Gold,
Lex Phoenix,
Sebastian Singh Soprano,
Joe, the low quality MB,
Andrea Brooks,
Jack Edwards,
Emily Roberts,
Dulcie,
Stefan Blakemore,
Noarte,
Crazy Richard,
Needles and Threads,
Flaming Daphne,
Dr. McGee,
Genevieve Dixon,
Rachel Harris,
Katie Reynolds,
Georgia Holden Burnett,
Grabalicious,
Mix Affin,
Root -1,
Ray,
Elizabeth Anderson,
Bernice Roust,
Ellen Malor,
Jay Hoskins,
Trowan,
Ashley,
Maddie B,
Setcab,
Jane,
Roberto DePrunk,
Rose Absolute,
Sarah,
Sina,
Kiki T,
D,
Sky Kalane,
Eric Widman,
B,
Jude,
Monsa Squirrel,
Fergus Evans,
Anubis a Jackal,
Kamina,
Brandon Craig,
Break the System,
yeah, Cian Phillips,
Heidi Reardon,
Ezra,
Lentil,
Clara Bulliami,
Amelia,
Samantha Raven,
my favorite name because it's the long one, Corvina Ravenheart, the transmittal DJ from Twitch and VR chat, will play St. Lucifer for props.
Tabitha Jo Cox, aka Candy,
Fiona McDonald,
Urgatroyd,
Ontologically Unjust,
Stella,
Cindergoza,
Rebecca Prentice,
Dan Oblivion,
Florence Stanley,
Helen _
Ellie Hollingsworth,
Nick Ross,
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
a mysterious anonymous patron. Ooh.
CB Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Ted Delphos,
Kai Lowen,
Vic Parsons,
Patreon user,
Vic Kelly,
Catherine,
Sabrina McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Kerrigan 12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren O'Nions,
Bernard's Pink, Jellybean,
Lanos,
and Chris Hubley. Thank you, everyone, for your ongoing support. We appreciate it greatly, and it keeps odd and strange content like this coming to your ears every 2 weeks or every month and a half if my house is full of termites.
We can't thank you enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we love you guys.
And good night.